Welcome to the Yogi MD podcast. It's Nadine, yoga teacher, health coach, and retired doctor, here to bring you and your body together, not in sickness, but in health. Thanks for taking this time for yourself. Adam Ashton is the co-host of What You Will Learn podcast. Every week, Adam and his co-host, Adam Jones, read a great book and summarize their main takeaways or conduct interviews of authors they admire. In this episode, Adam talks about his love of reading, why he loves podcasting, and how he applies what he learns to his everyday life. You may be surprised to know that Adam did not always read a lot. Tune in to find out how he turned it into a habit which he could sustain, and how you can too. I am absolutely thrilled that you are here, Adam. I know it's very early in the morning for you over in Australia. It's afternoon for me in Chicago.
Thank you so much for having me. And there's nothing better I could think to wake up on a Saturday morning for something like this for me.
And that just goes to show you that we are fellow nerds to be excited about podcasting on a Friday afternoon and a Saturday morning. So I thank you. I love your podcast. What I really love about it is you take us through such a journey in your seasons through books that maybe are popular, somewhat, but also things that we may not have on our radar. And I really like the way you distill summaries for the books and you entice us to want to know more. It's definitely got me in the mode of really needing to read more.
Well, thank you so much. I've been revisiting some of our older episodes recently, and they were interesting. That's for sure. I'd say we've definitely developed and improved along the way, but I'm glad that we've got to a point where we can give you a nice summary, give you a nice teaser, give you a lot of the information yourself, and then maybe encourage you to go out and read it a little bit more for yourself.
Oh yeah, definitely. So can you please tell us about yourself, a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I'm from Melbourne in Australia. I was born in Mildura, actually, which is like a country town about 8 hours out of Melbourne. So I've had a taste of the country life. My grandparents were on a farm. I've had a taste of the city life living in Melbourne. I lived in Papua New Guinea for 3 years as a kid as well. So that was a completely different experience. And then I sort of made my journey through not really knowing what direction I wanted to take after school, and tried out a bunch of different things, and some worked, some didn't, some I liked, a lot that I didn't. And so I think I'm still on that journey to finding what I want to do next. Mm-hmm. But I guess the main constant over the last 4 or 5 years has been books and podcasting, both reading books, listening to podcasts, and then making my own podcast to talk about books as well.
Definitely a curious person. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, definitely curious. I think that's a word that we've only recently come to embrace, I guess, and it seems to be popping up more and more now that we have embraced it. That we are, I guess, just insatiably curious to learn more and find out more things. And it just seems like the more you know, the more you realize that there's still more to learn.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that's part of the beautiful journey of being a lifelong learner.
Yeah, most certainly. There's like, whilst it's good, obviously, the more you learn, that you feel more confident, you feel more comfortable, and you feel like you've got more of a grasp on the world. I guess it just opens more and more doors for more things to learn next.
How did you come up with the idea for the podcast?
So we started the podcast, What You Will Learn, in 2016, and it was myself and my co-host, also called Adam Jones. We both finished our uni degrees at the same time, and we both started jobs in the city at the same time, like our first big real-world jobs at a big corporate office in the city, getting the training every day. And we decided to meet up once a week. I think it was actually probably just an excuse to get together with a few of the girls from our different offices and have coffees and stuff. But the girls started to drop off, but we stuck around. So we decided we'd start talking about what was going on at work, that some of the things that we were learning, some of the things that we were, I guess, realizing for the first time about how the real world operates. and we'd also talk about what kind of books we were reading, what kind of lessons we were learning. So we'd just be sharing what we'd read that week. And then we thought, okay, well, we're doing these weekly Friday morning coffees before work. Maybe let's start reading the same book at the same time so we can sort of sync up and we can then at least build upon each other's ideas. So rather than just talking about two random books, I guess from there we wanted to do something. We were both interested in always doing something more, always trying something different. We each had our own respective business attempts, and this was just the next thing that we wanted to try to do. So we thought, well, we're already reading books, we're already meeting up and talking about it. We both love listening to podcasts. Let's try and make our own.
What are some of your favorite podcasts?
I've gone through a lot of waves, I guess. In the early days, it was a lot of the interview shows like the Tim Ferriss, James Altucher, Jordan Harbinger, Joe Rogan, all those guys, where I'd listen to like every interview they did, every single episode religiously as soon as it came out. I've shifted a lot now, whereas I'm probably very picky and choosy about those types of shows and maybe listen to 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 8 of their interviews, depending on who the guest is. There's 3 podcasts that I've listened to every single episode of, and that's Akimbo by Seth Godin, A Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell, and The Way I Heard It by Mike Rowe. So they're the only 3 that I've listened to every episode of. And I'm really liking Adam Grant's Work Life. It's kind of a few years old, and I haven't listened to them all yet. So that'll soon join the list of the ones that I've listened to every episode of.
So who influenced you, do you think, of those people for your podcast?
I think I'll have to credit Tim Ferriss. So whilst I don't listen as religiously and barely at all anymore, I guess, but that was who I was listening to very religiously at the time. And we actually went to a Tony Robbins event as well, and that's sort of what really got us like fired up. And we're like, okay, we got to do something. And it was probably like the week after the Tony Robbins conference that we thought, okay, let's record our first episode.
So you and I met peripherally when we both did the podcast fellowship, the original one with Seth Godin. And so you had already been podcasting. So what drew you to start? Because I had no idea what I was doing or if I were really going to do this.
Okay. So I'd been going for 2 years at that point. And for me, I think it was, I guess as part of that curiosity, lifelong learning, a bit of the humility, realizing that whilst I'd had a podcast for 2 years, that didn't mean that I knew everything about podcasting, that's for sure. And so I was looking for, I guess, different to perhaps yourself, as you said, you didn't know what you were doing, so you're probably looking for some of the introductory stuff and how to get started. For me, it was more like, okay, I've already got started, but how can I do this a bit better? How can I do this a bit more professionally? How can I sort of step my game up a little bit? So that's sort of, and obviously I was a very big Seth Godin fanboy. So whenever something Seth Godin popped up, especially in the podcasting realm, I jumped straight on it.
How do you pick the books?
It's an interesting, again, the process, I guess, has evolved over time. When we first started, I'd probably read 20 or 30 books. So there was a whole heap in front of us that I still wanted to read. And now both of our lists to read, I guess, were very, very similar. So we just sort of picked and chose as we went along. Now it's sort of evolved to the point where whilst there's still probably 60 or 70% crossover in our interests, we've sort of diverged a little bit. And so now we sort of we alternate a book each week, picking the different things that most interest us with a few ground rules, I guess. But for me, like I've got 2 bookshelves. One bookshelf is full of the books I've read, and then one bookshelf is full of all the books that I've bought physically. They're sitting on the shelf, but I haven't read them yet. That one's actually, it's more than one shelf. It's overflowing because it seems like every book you read, they reference 2 or 3 other books. So I just go out and buy those. And then podcast guests, they talk about, you should read this book. So I go out and get those. So it seems to be a never-ending list of books still to read.
So you still read old-fashioned physical books then?
Yeah, I have to. I can't. I don't know. I just don't have the same connection, I guess, as to a digital book. I have it physically in front of me. Like I hold it with a pencil, taking some notes, drawing some little scribbles on it as I go. I guess I like seeing the physical progress as well of how far through a book I am. And yeah, it's very I like to do it old school for sure.
So would you describe that process as being related to the type of learner you are? Maybe more kinesthetic or visual?
Yeah, I think definitely visual for sure. That I do like to have those visual elements of it and be able to make my own marks on the book. I used to like keep the books like in perfect condition, no markings whatsoever, no folds on the pages. I used to have like just like sticky notes that I'd stick on the side if I want to write a note. But now I guess I'm making the books my own in a sense in terms of manipulating them as I go.
It's interesting you say that too, because I have definitely played with the idea of the different media to read. And recently I started doing Audible. I am not an auditory learner, so I'm really finding myself feeling very uncomfortable during the process of
Hmm.
not being able to see and not being able to grab a pen and write something down or fold the corner of a page. There's really something to be said for that in your hands experience of reading.
Yeah, it's interesting that I listen to so many podcasts and happily listen to podcasts and happily learn things as I'm listening, but I haven't been able to listen to an audiobook in its own right with the same level of engagement or understanding. I don't know why. I do have a Audible subscription. I listen to one or two audiobooks every month, but those audiobooks I'm listening to them on like 3.5x speed and listening to it as I'm reading it and taking notes. So
Oh,
it's yeah, so I'm
that's
doing both at
interesting.
the same time.
It sounds like it's important to you to read consistently. What influenced you to be that way?
I hadn't really read at all. I suppose when I was a kid, I used to like to read books, but then when I got to high school, I really only read the books that I had to read. And I guess it felt like a bit of a chore. And I don't know, reading Shakespeare and, or I don't know, books that I wasn't really that interested in. I was about to say Charles Darwin, but I meant Charles Dickens, all that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
And so then after school, for years, I didn't read anything. At least 4 or 5 years after high school, I probably read one book in 5 years. But it was when I got an internship in my penultimate year of uni, where I was heading into an 8 week work experience in the city in the suit for the first time. I thought, okay, well, I guess now it's probably time to start getting serious. For probably 6 months prior to that, I've been listening to podcasts, and they were always recommending books and the importance of reading and the importance of learning more things. So I pulled the trigger and like bought like 30 books and thought I'm gonna read all these and get better. And so I think it was just like from that first book that I read was How to Win Friends and Influence People, and just from that book, like I picked up so many lessons, so many cool ideas, so many different ways of doing things that I'd sort of, whilst it is rather pretty common sense stuff, it's things that you don't really do or you don't really think about. And
Hmm.
so just a few shifts, and I was able to use some of those on the people I was meeting for the first time in this internship. And I was like, man, books are pretty cool. So I guess from there, I just, gradually stepped it up and up to the point now where I think I probably did 65 books last year. We do a book a week on the podcast, plus a few of my own in between.
Wow. How do you form the habit around doing that? That takes discipline.
Yeah, I think it was a gradual build up over time. As I said, I was listening back to some of our old episodes for projects we're working on, and at the start, like there was really no structure to it, and like we'd read a few of the short books, like the 1 Minute Manager, which is like 80 pages or something,
Mm.
and some of those books were easy to get through in a week, but then we'd get to like a 250 page book, which at that time was massive for us. And so there was like a stretch of 2 or 3 weeks where we hadn't finished the book. So we did like a few documentaries in between and stuff like that where we were experimenting with. So at the start, we weren't at the one book per week levels.
Okay.
And now, yeah, I think now it's all about finding the little pockets of time. If you say you have to sit down and read for 1 hour every night after dinner, that's like a big imposition. You're adding a big slice, a big chunk of time to your day, as opposed to looking for little pockets here or there. It might be 6 minutes at the cafe, it might be 20 minutes on the train, and then on your lunch break you read for another 15 minutes, and over time you've built up to a solid amount of reading without really putting a big imposition on yourself.
There's this theme of making a task smaller. Like, for instance, I watched this documentary on Netflix about Bill Gates, and Bill Gates has this habit of going to this cabin by himself or something, and he reads this mammoth stack of books, and he is able to absorb everything he reads, and I'm looking at that and thinking to myself, well, how am I going to do that? That does not look doable to me. So if I want to step up my game, what do I do? And it just seems like you're not the first person who said, well, look, I didn't decide on day one to read 100 books in a week. It was kind of deciding how to fold that into my lifestyle and make time for it that felt manageable. So it didn't seem like I was just doing work. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think breaking it down into a small action that's a step in the right direction is much better than thinking, okay, well, here's my end goal. I'm not there yet, so that's a failure. So there's a book we did by Scott Adams, the guy who created the Dilbert cartoons. It's a long title. It's called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. And so the big idea from that book, and it was also echoed in Atomic Habits, and a lot of people have shared this similar idea of like goals versus systems. So a goal is something where at some point in the future, you want to attain this level of goal, whether that's reading a book a week, or whether that's starting a business, or whether that's losing 10 kilos or 25 pounds or something. And the goal at some distant point in the future, every day from when you set that goal until you reach it, you're a failure. Like every day you're failing. You haven't reached your goal yet, so you failed. And then when you get to that goal, I guess you've got two options. You celebrate for a small amount of time, but then it's like, well, what next? The thing that was driving you forward is gone. Do you set another goal that's harder, and then you have to work your failure again, and you're working even harder to get to the next goal? Instead of that, the opposite way of doing it is a system. And so the system is something small you do every single day where you can win every day. Rather than failing every day you do your system, you win. So whether that's breaking it down to reading one page a day, if you read one page every day, then you win. If it's, going for a walk around the block at lunchtime rather than losing 25 pounds. So like those small systems in a very, very small actionable thing that gets you one step closer in the right direction is probably a better way to approach it.
Do you challenge yourself with books with which you have little interest or might not feel like would be for you, or you might not agree with the subject matter? In other words, do you purposely try to make yourself uncomfortable? I think because part of what I've been learning too about the process of being a lifelong learner, not just the curiosity aspect and the breaking things down to be successful into smaller chunks, but also getting comfortable with the idea that you're going to be uncomfortable when you're challenged by something.
Yeah, not for a long time. A long time, the answer would have been no. Only probably until recently, the last 6 months, I can probably get closer to saying yes. Part of that is to do with the process, I guess, of picking the books now. Whereas I said before, we'd sort of fight it out a little bit, and we'd meet somewhere in the middle where we're both happy. So we're both pretty comfortable and both safe and both doing close to what we wanted to do. Whereas now that we're sort of diverging somewhat and we're both alternating books, and like for each half of the year we pick 10 books each, it means that I'm sort of picking more things that are a little bit more extreme on my end. He's picking things that are a little bit more extreme on his end. So things that I wouldn't normally read, like we've done some like the Stephen Hawking book, a big sciencey book about space and crazy maths stuff that I probably wouldn't have read by myself, and it was a struggle to grasp. A lot of things about history, whether that was like the lessons of history or guns, germs, steel. So some of these things that I never really had that much interest in, but I was forced in that sense to read them for the podcast, was a good thing. And then for me personally, only like literally in the last month or so, I've been thinking about, I grabbed a couple of fiction books, a couple of philosophy books, some things like some creative thinking books, and always trying to look for something different than what I'm reading at the moment. I think for probably the first 200 books, my answer would be no, but more recently I can say, yeah, I'm starting to look for more different, challenging, left of center ideas.
What books, or maybe a book that you could think of offhand, may have surprised you once you got past your initial skepticism?
Yeah, a few that I really liked that I didn't think I would like were some of like the ancient philosophy books. So like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I really liked. The Tao Te Ching as well, I really liked. So some of those books that I just thought, if I had read them too early, I would have just not got it. I would have switched off. I would have thought this is just bizarre, or this is a bit wanky, or this is just like for the artsy philosophy students who think they're really cool, philosophizing about the world. But I think I read them at the right time where I had sort of enough of a grounding, and I was able to, I don't know, I feel like they were very different books that you could read every single year and that'd be a completely different book, because I think each time you read them, you're going to take a different lesson out of them.
How do you make a book less about just being esoteric? Oh, I read that thing and I can go on with my day now or my week now, into I read this book and here's a thing that I learned from it and here's what I've done with it to use it to enhance my life?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of books that have got a lot of great ideas, but maybe it's harder to put into practice, or maybe you do it for a week and it's awesome, and then you start to drop off again. I think some of the better ones that I've really stuck with, I feel like Seth Godin packages his books very well. It's generally one core idea, something pretty simple. They're short books and not extra fluff than what they need to be. And one of my absolute favorites is The Dip. The idea that anything you start, any new project you take on, whether that's starting a podcast or writing a book or starting a new job or trying out a new exercise regime, whatever you do, there's going to be some early wins. So straight away, going from zero to like starting, you're going to have some early wins and it's going to be amazing. But then very soon after that, there's a long stretch in the middle, which he calls the dip, which is where you're putting in extra effort, but you're not seeing the extra rewards at the end. A lot of people quit in the middle. And because most people are quitting, most people's podcasts die at episode 7 or episode 15 or episode 30, and those podcasts are gone. There's only a very few left on the other side. And because of the value of that scarcity, it makes you extra valuable. If you've got a podcast that's been around for 300 episodes, that's pretty amazing. And so the rewards that come with that scarcity seem to exponentially increase right at the very end.
So is that how you're able to keep up your morale? Because there's something crazy, a crazy number, like over 700,000 podcasts that are out there right now. You know, they're becoming more popular. So it's easy, I think, at least I felt this way, to feel like a really, really, really tiny, insignificant voice. And it can be confusing, right, for people to decide what to pick, or if they have time to listen to you. Their time is scarce.
Yeah, I think a big part of the dip is, the first thing is just to recognize that it's there. So if you know that the dip's there and then you know that it's going to be a long grind, it means you've got to pick the right thing at the start. It means not picking something and it feels great, and then once it starts to hit the dip, then you quit and try something else which feels great at the start. So you've got to pick the right thing that you're willing to stick out. So I think that's the first element of it for us, was realizing the dip's there and committing to seeing it through to the other side is a big part. And then sort of more broadly with podcasting, I feel like whatever project it is, you got to look for the little wins along the way that give you that fuel. I think it can often be hard where you put out an episode and nothing happens, and the downloads are the same as they were last week, and you don't hear anything from anybody. But I think just little wins along the way, whether it's you get an awesome guest that you were looking forward to, or you hit a new milestone and you hit your first 100 downloads or your first 1,000 downloads, or whatever it is that is a milestone for you, or maybe you get your first review from a fan, or maybe someone emails you who said, "Hey, I've listened to the show; it was really good." Like all of these small little wins along the way, I guess I just treat as like fuel to keep us going for the next month or two of podcasting until we have the next little boost.
And that's a really important concept, especially for somebody who's a perfectionist or a type A personality. Guilty as charged. where we tend to forget to celebrate the successes. And people
Yes.
keep telling me that. Hello, celebrate the fact. Stop for a minute and actually enjoy something about your journey. It shouldn't just be about the work, the work, the work, the work. And remember to celebrate the successes, is what you're saying. Even though they may seem tiny, they may seem insignificant, it's still something to celebrate.
Yeah, definitely. And you can even, I guess, manufacture your own just by keeping going, whether it's 50 episodes or whether it's your first year of podcasting. Like there's all these things that don't rely on other people. It doesn't rely on somebody downloading it or somebody sharing it or somebody writing into you. Like these are all things that you can control just by doing the work yourself.
Is there anything else we may have left out during our discussion that you wanted to bring up?
I've really enjoyed talking to you. You've been a phenomenal interviewer. So there's some things I've been picking up from you that I'd like to learn for myself and use in my next interview that I do. The only other thing I would say is about 2 years ago, we made our first top 50 list where we ranked our favorite 50 books of all time. 12 months after that, we updated it. We haven't updated it for 2020 yet because we're working on the next project, which is the top 100 books. So we've read so many books that we couldn't possibly get down to 50, and we even struggled to get them down to 100 as well.
And you've just weaved in so elegantly what you just taught me in terms of celebrating the successes and evolving and celebrating those wins by just how you said that. You started off with 50 and then you made it 100, and now it's even hard to get it back down to that 100. And so I thank you for that.
I think just a message that I'll sort of say to you, but what I'm really saying to myself is just keep going, keep doing it.
It's amazing. You're my second Australian friend through podcasting. I could not have said that 2 years ago. It's crazy. It's crazy.
We're a long way away. It would have never happened.
It just would have happened. And I get to meet such a diverse, incredible number of people who have been teaching me so much and enriching my life through this podcasting world. So my final question, what is your personal definition of what it means to be healthy?
Thank you for the prompt, because honestly, before discussing this interview with you, I really didn't have one. I really didn't have any overarching philosophy or principle in this area, which I think is a vitally important thing to have. A few of the things I thought about, which while I'm still formulating this philosophy, I don't have a tight answer for you yet, but some of the things I was just thinking about was, well, from the health aspect, I don't want to be too rigid in my thoughts or beliefs. I don't want to become too attached to any one way of thinking. So I think being open to new things, being open to new ideas, new people, new ways of operating in the world is vitally important. So I think that ties back to the elements of learning and curiosity, I think, are vital to health. And then the other thing I was thinking about is taking some time to do the small things that make you happy as well. So for me, it's reading. For me, I really like swimming as well. And also lying down and cuddling with my dog as well is always a nice little thing to do as well, just for a little bit of extra health and happiness, I think.
Oh, yeah. Our furry babies do keep us happy. And now it's time for the Mindful Minute. When you are immersed in a good book, time flies. It's easy to forget to take a break. Sometimes our posture suffers. So let's do an experiment. Sit in mountain pose. Take a deep breath in and out of your nose, letting your abdomen expand as you inhale and relax as you exhale. Now, slouch on purpose. Notice how difficult it feels to take that same deep breath. The lesson here? Good posture and good breathing go hand in hand. You will be rewarded with more energy and less pain. Remember, this is all a practice. If you like what you hear, don't forget to go to yogimd.net, listen to the latest episodes of the podcast, hit any of the links on that page to subscribe so you can hear the older episodes, and please tell a friend. If you'd like to practice yoga with me, contact me at yogimd.net. And finally, have a listen to What You Will Learn podcast, and I will leave you with this quote by Arthur Ashe. Success is a journey, not a destination. The doing is often more important than the outcome. Thanks for being here. See you next time.